Hey.
To shoot for George. Picked up by Allen. 2 to shoot. Going to be a tough one. A 3. Oh, it's good! Paul George knocks it down. He's got 27.
Alright, Joe, we are continuing our little catching up on the NBA offseason series, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, today we're talking Paul George as he made the switch from the Los Angeles Clippers to the Philadelphia 76ers. Again, one of the bigger moves of the offseason. Now, I've been a pretty big Paul George fan for quite some time. You know, everyone always talks about how aesthetically pleasing his game is, and I fell for the trap a while ago. I remain on Paul George Island. We've lived through some really rough downs, some rough storms, but I still got my property out there. But at this point in his career, I really hate to say this, but the one thing that always comes to mind when I think of Paul George was that absolutely brilliant Bill Simmons quote. It was earlier this season when Bill Simmons on his podcast said that Paul George is like a cat. He'll jump on your lap every once in a while. You know, he's super lovable. Other times you're like, oh, where's Paul George? Ah, he's in the garage. Anyway, what is there to like about Paul George as we approach the 2025 NBA season? Well, he is still very much a good scorer of the basketball. His numbers were a bit down as compared to other years, especially his LA Clipper years, but there's good reason for that. They added James Harden this past season, so because of that, his usage numbers went completely way down. His efficiency numbers actually shot up though. It was some of his best of his Clippers tenure. So weirdly, all that put together, it's almost like Paul George played like a very good role player role this past season rather than being a star, all-star level guy. Obviously, there were a lot of mouths to feed on that Clippers roster with Harden, Kawhi, Paul George. So, you know, naturally someone had to take a step back, and it ended up being Paul George, who kind of, I don't want to say weirdly, but he found a really good spot for himself, efficiency-wise, scoring-wise. So like I said, even though the numbers are down, his game on tape still looks brilliant. Again, the 3-level scoring is still there. From the 3-point line, he can catch and shoot, he can hit you off the dribble, he can hit step backs, he can hit the side steps, and if he gets hot, he can knock down a lot of threes. And for much of the same reason, he can also drive and do some one dribble pull-up type things in the mid-range. One thing that stood out to me, and I don't know if this was just a Ty Lue thing and his offense, but Paul George got a lot of post-up opportunities last year, which, as we all know, posting up is kind of a dying breed in today's NBA. Although if you look back at the Clippers games, they do it a bunch with Kawhi and Paul George, and it was because it was really effective. Paul George is great, and he'll just bully you for a few dribbles, then hit some ridiculous turnaround shot, post fade, or just pull up right in your face after a jab step. And then of course, to be a true 3-level scorer, you also have to be able to attack the rim and score in the paint, which might be my favorite thing about Paul George's game. Again, with all of the beautiful aesthetic pull-ups and drives and everything of all those kinds of sorts, I do think the drives to the rim are some of my favorite. He's not really someone that's known for his strength, you know, someone like Kawhi Leonard who is able to just straight up bully his way to the rim. Paul George is a lot better at the quickness aspect. He's good at beating you off the dribble. He'll lull you to sleep with the ISO dribble moves between the legs and then just burst right to the rim. But with that being said, he is still a very strong finisher. He is pretty good at scoring through contact on layups. He can still throw down some dunks like we saw earlier in his career. And easily my favorite thing about these drives is his deceleration that he busts out every now and then. You guys might know this from Luka Doncic's game. He made it very popular, but Paul George is just as good, if not better than Luka, at hitting that deceleration right as he gets to the rim. Just absolutely sheds defenders easily, makes the layups that much easier, and it's a great move. I think it might be his best move of his entire arsenal. I also appreciate that Paul George can get to the foul line. He's good at drawing fouls around the rim. Again, the numbers were down last year from what they usually are. Typically, he's like a 5 free throw game kind of guy. Again, it was down to like 3.5 this past season. Blame it on the usage. Paul George is one of those great offensive minds that understands that free throws are the easiest way to score points, especially if you are in a slump or your team just needs to get the ball in the bucket. As for the rest of his offensive game, as I just mentioned, his numbers were down this last season. Assist-wise, he was sitting at about 3.5, which was down from his past couple of seasons with the Clippers, where he was over 5 assists. And again, usage, it's the big theme of this video, usage and efficiency. But don't let the low assist numbers fool you. He is still a very capable passer. He's not, anything insane. He's not going to be flinging, one-handed behind the back passes. But because of the fact that Paul George is such a great scorer of the basketball, he knows how to use that gravity and how to get that defensive attention and to then use it against the defense to create good shots for his teammates. There were a lot of drive and kick opportunities in the games I watched. I mentioned how he posted up a lot, and there were a few plays where he would get doubled in the post and he'd fire a really nice skip pass to an open teammate. All in all, at this point in his career, there still are not many flaws in Paul George's offensive game. He is one of the most complete players in the NBA right now, and there are just very little ways to attack him on that end of the court defensively. And speaking of defense, nice of me to bring it up, he's still a really good defender. He's definitely not in that elite tier anymore, but he is someone that you feel comfortable slotting him into a lineup, and even if the jump shots aren't falling for him, he can still be a contributor on the other side, the defensive side of the basketball court. He gets into passing lanes, he slides really well out on the perimeter. Even had a few possessions on SGA where he was taking charge on the defensive side of the ball against them and was playing some really good defense. Throughout his entire career, he's always been really good at getting steals, and he was amongst the league leaders earlier in his career. He still gets them every now and then at this point in his career. Again, not as great as he once was, and it's very much due to the fact that he is aging, he is getting older. All in all, still a really solid, good defender. So where does that leave us? As we approach this next season, obviously the Philadelphia 76ers remain one of the most, I don't know what word you want to use, like cursed teams in the entire NBA. They have had one of the best players in the NBA in Joel Embiid for a while now, and they are yet to see even a conference championship. And they've seen a lot of roster turnover during this Embiid era, which just makes it feel worse than it's been that they have seen such little accomplishment in Philadelphia. So obviously the big question when it comes to Paul George making this move to Philly, and again, that's the title of the video for a reason, but does Paul George finally actually move the needle for the Philadelphia 76ers? And I'll be honest, when I started making this video, I was pretty set that my answer to this question was going to be no, and I was going to go on some huge rant about how the real needle movers to me in Philadelphia are simply just Joel Embiid's health and Tyrese Maxey taking another leap as a player. And while I still believe that those two things will have a very big impact on this upcoming season for Philadelphia, especially come playoff time, I do have to admit that my mind has been changed about Paul George. On the one hand, obviously Paul George is not the same superstar that he once was. That's become evident very slowly as his career has progressed, and he's finally reaching that age where you just don't want to have to rely on Paul George to be the best player, or maybe even the second best player on your team if you want to be a true contender. While on the other hand, I think this last season was actually a really good showcase for how he could help the 76ers team be an actual legit contender, because again, he's not going to be the number one or the number two. He could be when he's hot, but me personally, I would like to see him act as more of a number three behind Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And if anything, we shouldn't think of Paul George as being the third superstar, but more as him just being one of the most elite 3-and-D role players in the entire NBA, because he perfectly fits that mold. And again, last season was such a good example of that. James Harden comes to the Clippers, Paul George's usage goes way down, but his efficiency shoots up. So in our minds, I feel like we should see that and say, wow, yeah, Paul George in a limited role is a really, really good player in that role. So yeah, to actually answer the question, I guess the Paul George edition does move the needle a little bit for me for the Sixers, but it is the other things I mentioned, with Embiid's health and Tyrese Maxey taking a leap. All of those things are coming together, and I have to be honest, I do actually have some belief in the 76ers again. I can't wait to see how they make me look like a fool for saying that, but I'm riding with them for now. At the very least, I'm really excited and hope we get to see some like Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George triangle offense down the wire in a bunch of games. That's mostly what I'm just rooting for right now. Anyway, that's all I got on Paul George. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Outside of that, like, subscribe, all of those good things, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.